Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Tea House Theatre. Today we'll be discussing singing, choirs, and mental health, particularly in terms of the COVID situation, the lockdown situation we've had over the last 12 months. We, of course, have a delightful and wonderful choir that would normally run at the Tea House Theatre that's been impeded, let's say, over the last little while, and that led to this thought of gathering some wonderful associated artistic personages of the Tea House Theatre around a table to sip some Tea House Leaf number 2 and have a chat. So, as is often the case in Tea House Theatre podcasts, we have one of our resident artists, Alphie Pritchard, who will be discussing this with Talibah, who is the leader of the Tuneless Choir, and William, who is a professional singer, has worked with us on Burns Night, and has studied singing and mental health in the course of his career. So I'm just going to allow everyone to introduce themselves, and then we'll get into a nice discussion. So, Alfie, would you like to start?
Yep, good afternoon, folks. Alfie here, speaking. I'm here, I think, one, because of my association with creativity in a very general spectrum, but also because I do suffer, but it's under control now, from what I call manic depression. And I call it manic depression rather than bipolar for very personal reasons, which we might go into later actually. But also there was a sort of strong sense of history. The history of madness, the history of mad doctors, and what has come, or what is coming down the line now that we're meant to be coming out of lockdown, and what just might be something, certainly behaviours, certain ways that we're going to start communicating with each other. I don't believe that we're going back to that awful expression, normality, because I'm afraid in my sense and my sensitivity, I do not believe in normality. And that comes out of my experience with manic depression.
Talibah.
Hi. Yeah, that was really brilliant listening to that. It was just fascinating. That's just the beginning. Yeah, my name is Talibah Rivers, and I run the Tuneless Choir from the Tea House Theatre. We've been here for a couple of years now, and obviously with the situation that was going on, we were restricted from being able to practice, and it brought up a lot of issues around that, because people come to the choir, a lot of them. It's a choir for people that can't obviously sing. It's on the tin, Tuneless Choir. Nobody believes me, but that's what it's for. And a lot of people come. It was kind of very social, and so I started doing, for about a year, I was running sessions on Zoom, and it was so different, and it just wasn't, it was like not being able to be next to someone and hearing all the voices together. It was very difficult for some people. So they didn't really like being on Zoom, but there were a few people who were unwell who they really appreciated meeting up once a month to have a little sing and catch up. But it was really difficult having, you didn't know how much you missed it until you couldn't do it anymore. So yeah, and before I pass on to the next guest, I just wanted to say that I was having a really hard time in my life while I was running the choir, and for me it just kind of was a bit of a lifesaver, because it really kept my spirits up, because I had to kind of show up for everyone. They didn't need to know what was going on with me in the background, and it was my endorphins were raised every time, so without fail. So I do think it's really important that people are able to sing together, and not with masks on, and definitely not at too much of a distance, because it's defeating the object.
Right. I'm William. I have a background in classical singing. That's what a lot of people think of as opera. There's also a lot of church music. I grew up with a fairly conventional sort of background like that, but started early-ish on when I left college. I went into teaching unexpectedly. They told me I shouldn't waste my time going to teacher training college, but I was offered a job. In that job, I came across one of my first instances, I'll perhaps talk later on about that, of someone who was troubled through the singing expressed a trouble in their background, a girl of 11 or 12. I progressed working in a girls' school for many years, nearly 30 years, and then suddenly, 15, nearly 20 years ago, I went into adult education. Still singing a bit, but around the turn of the millennium, I rather lost confidence in my singing. I got very depressed, and I managed to turn around. I ran away to sea, but that's another story I won't tell now. I managed to turn things around largely through working at Morley College. Now, in Morley College, they have a choir called the Can't Sing Choir, a little bit like Talibah's Tuneless, and I started getting really interested in this question of why do people think they can't sing? Why do they think they are tone deaf? I started talking to students when I had the opportunity to, and began to hear all sorts of stories, things that I had never really heard before. And that made me more and more interested. I started working on something called Tone Deaf No Way. And the result of this interest and this exposure to a lot of adults who wanted desperately to learn to sing and were expressing a huge amount of gratitude when they managed to make a bit of progress. I started thinking about this a little bit more scientifically, and by chance got involved in a research project at my old college, Guildhall, and then ultimately to a PhD. I claim nothing having a doctorate. I don't claim any authority, but what I do claim is that my supervisor encouraged me to look at the whole question of community music, the question of what it does for health, and of course now, what it doesn't do for health when we're deprived of it.
Actually, that's a wonderful lead-in, actually, to the first topic, which I'd like to discuss, which is being deprived of it. Obviously, we've been through I don't even know what to call it, but let's call it just call it a lockdown. We've had no association. We've had no that association that we take for granted has been taken away, which means that especially cultural activity, has been much rescinded. It's very difficult. No theatres, no choirs, no concerts, no sporting events, no gathering of humanity and communal, emotional outpouring. But this is obviously not the first time this has ever happened in human history. So I just wanted to maybe draw some historical comparisons where different times or different authorities have taken away these freedoms, I suppose you call them. And if Alfie, could you tell us some stuff about that?
Yeah, right, I'll get you start off with a story. I mean, basically, one thing I sort of missed out in the first introduction is that I was born in King's Cross, in what I call bomb culture, which is basically soon after the Second World War finished. And one thing about that culture, which I didn't mention before, was actually singing. Every Friday night and Sunday night in the local pubs, and there was a hell of a lot of them in King's Cross, people would sing. But there was one pub called the Northumberland Arms, a huge great pub, which attracted the Irish navvies, as they were called then. And navvy comes from navigator, because they were building the railways.
Yeah.
And there was this amazing jukebox, absolutely incredible, because I was a mod, a cultural movement. But every third Friday, another jukebox would make an appearance, and there were free records on this jukebox, and they were all Irish rebel songs.
It's amazing.
One of them was in a weary Brixton prison where an Irish rebel lay. That's what I remember. But tears would be flowing down the faces of these men and their wives, and then a bagpipe player would come in with a sash and take contributions for the old RIA. So I was surrounded by music and sound. But what I want to talk about is something else. I went to, me and my partner, Ross Price, we went to Glenfinnan on the west coast of Scotland, I think in about 1970, and fell in love with it. It became our second home. Now, Glenfinnan, in terms of Highland history and in terms of Scottish history and identity, is a very important location. Unfortunately, it's been taken over by Harry Potter at the moment, but we'll forget that. Damn Harry Potter. And see, the thing about Glenfinnan, and I'm going back to 1745. This was a period of great sort of trauma in both England and Scotland. They had signed the Union, everything was going okay, except there was this little problem in France, and that was the Stuarts, who were the royalty. And one of their sons, Prince Charles, who was basically Polish, spoke a bit of Gaelic and a bit of English, but his main language was Polish. He decided, he took it upon himself to start a revolution to put into place the new, or the rightful king of the Union, which was King Charles. So he set out on his own. He didn't tell nobody. He was a very charismatic individual, evidently. Anyway, he landed in Glenfinnan in 1745. By this time, the clan chieftains had heard that a prince was coming.
Prince was coming.
Smash the bastards. Sorry to swear. So he, there was a great debate about whether they should have a revolution, whether it should happen or not. But eventually, yes, okay, because he's the prince, and we will follow him. It's remarkable how they understood him, because the Scottish chieftains, most of them spoke the Gaelic, but also French, not much Polish. But anyway, that's another story. So it's called the Raising of the Banner, and that took place in Glenfinnan, where the Stuart banner was raised and the clans would arrive, which they did. Very romantic, very beautiful, lovely scenery, and you can imagine when you go there, if you remember that story, you can almost see the clans coming over the hills through the mist. And they all marched off to Fort William. They stayed overnight, they marched into Edinburgh, they stayed a couple of days, and then they crossed into England. And by the way, they were defeating English armies who were running away. Every time they heard this army, they would run. And the army actually got down to Preston, and a big debate took place. Do they march into London, or do they go back? And the reason they wanted to go back, some of the chieftains, was because farming, cattle, and the troops were not troops in outfits, they were ordinary clansmen. That they weren't warriors in our sense, they were just clansmen. And life was bloody awful for them, but they wanted to go back home. And they did. And this horrendously sad journey back into the Highlands But waiting in the background were the English, who were out to seek really heavy time revenge on the clans. This should not have happened. It was a disaster, but never again. So what they did, the clans split basically, but the remainders met on Culloden Field. There's a great pibroch, which is a poem about that. And within 45 minutes, literally 45 minutes, the clans were wiped out. Virtually wiped out from history. Because what happened afterwards is something that we don't really talk about. And that was a colonial power imposing its will upon another culture, but destroying the culture. You know, the Highland culture, up until then, was very communal based, and it was also held together by music, by poetry and by storytelling. So, the clans were massacred in 45 minutes. The massacre took 2 days because it continued. But what this Prince William did, and these generals, they realised that in order to suppress the clans for good, was to suppress the culture. Now, the music before then was not written down, it was spoken. You would go boomity, 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 boomity. You would get the tune, and that would be the pibroch, and then you get the story. And there was a school on the Isle of Skye where if you was going to be a piper or a storyteller, you would go to that school. That school was burnt down. But even worse, the language was banished. So you think, well, how can these guys are still speaking Gaelic, everyday Gaelic. So what they did, the English, they said, no, we can't ban them. They're just peasants. They'll die out. What we'll do, we'll make sure that the clan leaders learn English. Most of them could speak English anyway, and French. So it was this wiping out of a unique culture that I personally think was already declining. It was already on the right, the way out, because of modernity that was coming in, and the clan chieftains were more interested in making money from the land rather than looking after their people. But not only did they sort of give up on their people, they gave up on a whole lot of more important aspects of what music was about. So if you're a traveller going through the Highlands then, you could stay overnight in a cottage or whatever, and you would be part of that culture. You would be welcomed, and you would be sung to, and you could sort of share the singing, share the poetry. Now that goes on now. That's being rediscovered, and it sounds romantic, but you must know it was bloody hard. But for something like about 20 years, the language was almost, the Highlands were silent, and it's in silence as well that we can hear the sadness of the wind going through, just echoing through the glens. I can go on all day talking about this, but this is one aspect where the power of a culture and the power of music can be easily wiped out because it's deemed a threat. And I think we should keep, music is powerful on many, many, many levels, but it can threaten the ruling classes as well. And that's something that I'm interested in. But on a positive note, the English invented a flower called Sweet William, in memory of William who wiped out the clans. Up in Scotland, it's called Stinking Billy.
Is it?
Yeah. And it's still referred to
like
as Stinking Billy.
I'm tempted to offer William a right of reply.
I think he should have a right of reply.
No, please.
Yeah, but in Glenfinnan, Charlie McFarland, and lots of people still kept the culture going, but Charlie, amazing piper, and he taught me a lot about music, and he taught me a hell of a lot about Scottish music. But his second son, Ian, for some reason Charlie knew that Ian would be a classical Highland fiddler, playing the fiddle. So every night when Ian was meant to be put into his cot, Charlie would play a gentle fiddle, very gentle, very sweet, and put the fiddle in the cot. So when Ian woke up, he would touch the fiddle. And it worked. He became, and is now, one of the top fiddle players in the world, basically. And he's actually set up a school in, not Fort William, Fort Augustus, teaching the Gaelic language.
Fantastic.
So there's a renaissance going on.
Yeah, yeah.
If I could add something to that, not being stinking Billy, I hope. I'm in the process of relocating, migrating to Scotland, and in doing so, there are two things I want to say. One, I'm trying obviously to be aware of Scottish culture, both old and new. And a rather awful point of modern history, I'm talking about 80 years ago, just after the war, just before the war, they were still suppressing the Gaelic language in schools. And when we had sort of universal education after the war, it was absolutely forbidden. So it had a disastrous effect. Luckily, I don't think they had a ban on the music, but it had a disastrous effect on the language. And I'm also happy to say that there is now a college on Skye, like the old one that Alphie refers to, where they study the Celtic tradition of music, and it's wonderful. I was given a little personal example of the feeling of what it's like to be cut out. I wanted to learn Gaelic. Not many people on the island speak, but all the place names are in Gaelic, and there are a few speakers, and several of us want to begin a language group. So my partner and I started a bit. I was a bit late behind because I was tied up doing things. I learned a reasonable vocabulary, but I wasn't very good at talking. And he said, "Oh, you must come and join this class that I'm doing." So I joined the class, an online Zoom class, and I was lost. It was like one of those awful nightmares from childhood where you're suddenly plunged into something where you can't say a word because you don't speak it. And all the rest of the class were all happily having little conversations, and I was just struck dumb. I knew some of the words, but I couldn't string them together. And it made me realise what it feels like to be told to shut up to a lot of my so-called tone-deaf students. Experience. They were told that it was verbal abuse as children. Yeah.
Well, I think that sort of leads on to what I was going to discuss, because all of the people in my choir, except maybe Freddie, have been told at some point.
Oh no, I was told. I had to mouth in choir in the first year. I had to, when I was in choir, I had to mouth.
I'm sorry, I'm a bit gobsmacked by that. I didn't think you had it as well.
No, I did. No, I couldn't sing as a child. I think I'm a little better now. I think I'm a little better now because of acting training, and therefore
that's what I'm picking up on.
like the training of the diaphragm and the lungs, not necessarily for singing, but for the instrument itself, gives me. I'm a little better than I was when I was 12. You know.
I see. Because I was just going to say that every single person that joins it has got that sort of story. There's not one single person that hasn't been told. And how the actual tuneless choir started is because one of the founders, she was told to when she was at school to shut up because she was spoiling it for everyone else. And then she met the other co-founder, and who was a singing teacher. And I think they came up with the idea of the tuneless choir, and the whole point of the tuneless choir is tuneless choirs are that we don't teach people how to sing. You're just there to express yourself and have fun, and the focus isn't on the sound. But I mean, the stories that people tell me, they're really quite shocking. There was one woman who came on the very first session, and she'd said that she took her daughter to a singing class, to a singing teacher, and the singing teacher said, "Oh no, I can't teach her." And it's like, to a child, that was like just a couple of years back. So, but she luckily found someone who was really nice, because I would have done it, but she found someone. But yeah, it's like, you know, I mean, I've even been told that I can't sing, and I'm actually really good. So, you know, and I think, well, if people say that to me, what's it like for someone, because you believe it, you know.
Yeah.
And to not sing is like a fundamental thing for me that's just, it's like your heart beating or something. If you can't sing, it's something you miss out on. So
it's also a denial of a culture. It's a denial of who we are.
it is.
I think it's an absolute denial of
It's
who.
because you are your voice. So if somebody says there's something wrong with it, that's like your whole person. You know, like a subliminal kind of message.
I mean,
And that's
it's
what
that
I pick
expression,
up on.
shut up.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah. Shut up. Yeah,
it's bullying.
yeah, because it makes you
know,
shut down.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, sometimes you have to say shut up, you know, but in a way that is not a censorship. It's not a punishment.
Yeah, it's a real.
But a lot of time it can be used, I think, in all forms of teaching. Shut up, which means get back to the class. Just go
You're
out.
not
And
important.
shut up.
You've got no. Your feelings don't matter.
And if it's to do with singing
Oh
and
my
your
God,
voice,
it's way worse. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's because when you speak, that's how you think, because you think in words, and so if you're told to shut up and not speak, then that's inhibiting your thinking. But I suppose with singing, well, that's also inhibiting your emotions, because singing has an emotional
But it's expressive,
context
isn't
to it,
Yeah.
more so than just speaking.
Yeah. It's expressive, and the thing is, when you're singing, you do slightly different things to when you're talking. So that's why people probably think I can't sing, but it's just literally you do slightly different things, and that's fine. But yeah, I was quite shocked by a lot of the stories that I actually heard, and it was really nice to be able to put something on that people could think, oh, this is my space, you know. And to be fair, there are a couple of people that actually can sing, but they just think they can't, and that's fine. You know, I can hear them. I'm like, okay, but that's not what it's about, and that's not the thing that will make someone want to sing. Not saying, oh, you can sing, everyone. You know, that's not it. It's like you can. It's good to sing no matter what you sound like.
Yeah. What I love about the way you work is what you said at the beginning, that there is no criticism, there is no learning. And I think for a lot of people that is absolutely brilliant, because that's what they want to do. They want to sing, and they're allowed to sing, and no one tells them not to. I was put in a funny position in that I was teaching not totally unsimilar thing at Morley College with this can't sing choir. However, we had a slightly different repertoire and also a slightly different agenda. So I would encourage, and the person who taught me to do it, would encourage a little bit more, just a little bit more about what we're trying to do. Telling people to open their mouths and getting them to breathe properly. A little bit, not too much. But then I was put on the spot because I can clearly remember two particular individuals coming up to me after the choir, after several weeks, saying, well, look, I still don't think I can sing. You know, what am I doing here? And as I had always been curious right from the beginning of my teaching career, I gave them a few private lessons, gratis, just partly for my own satisfaction, to try and find out what was going on, see if I could help them, give them some encouragement. And then I sort of started to hear more about these backstories. As Talibah says, every one of them, almost without exception, was told to shut up as a child. And it took me right back to my very first, or second possibly, student when I was just out of college. She was this 11, 12-year-old girl. She had a sweet little voice. She was doing a theatre course. It was a theatre school. And she just needed to be able to sing. Everyone's got to be able to sing and dance and act in that environment. And one day I was doing something. I said, look, I want to really hear what's going on. I'm going to stop playing because you know what you're singing thoroughly. So don't do that, please. I've got to have the piano. And I thought, what's this about? I mean, I'd never met anything quite like this. So it all came out very quickly. She said, I can't stand singing by myself. If I sing round the house, my mother tells me not to. And I thought, poor girl, there's nothing wrong with her voice. For some reason it irritated her mother. It surely wasn't because she sounded horrible. Weird. Very, very weird. And that was the first time, because I developed a sort of theory of my own of why people might not be able to sing in tune. But this was something completely other, this abuse thing. And really, the vast majority of people who I met, either on my courses or in the research, have been like that. And I'll tell you just one more anecdote, if I may. The chap I met on the research project, he came to me as we had a number of teachers and a number of students allocated to each student. And we were all experienced teachers, but we hadn't discussed how we taught singing. But we all had an interest in people who couldn't sing. So the idea was to gather all our conversations together, record the lessons, get the students to write their report, get the teachers to write their report. And yes, this guy came to me fairly late in the course, and he could sing perfectly well. And I thought, this is a bit weird. His wife told me that he was absolutely hopeless, he should never sing. And she was involved in opera, so she ought to have known. And I thought, why do you think you can't sing? You're not out of tune, you've got quite good breath control. It's perhaps not the most beautiful sound, but... And he said... I said, this is all very strange. And I sat him down, I said, look, I can prove to you with a little digital readout on my computer that you're singing in tune. You can see it for yourself. What's this about? And what did you do when you were a child? Oh, I was a chorister. I won prizes. The bishop used to give me prizes. And I said, really? And yet you think you can't sing, or you... And he said, well, look at me. And strangely, I hadn't really looked at him before. He was a rather angry sort of person, not unpleasant, but he had a tenseness in him. He had actually rather dark skin, and he said, can't you tell? My father was black American, and didn't I stick out in the little Scottish village I brought up? And I made a sort of guess, and this comes back to the mental health thing. I mean, I'm not qualified in any way to make this judgment, it was just an instinct. The idea of elective muteness came to me. That's to say that these are children, usually children, very young people, who don't talk. They can talk, they're capable of talking, but they just will not communicate. And it generally apparently has a psychological root, a trauma generally, perhaps a very specific trauma, perhaps just continual abuse, who knows. And I said to him, look, I'm not suggesting you suffered abuse, but in a way you abused yourself. You were a wonderful chorister, you had a lovely voice, and you didn't want the attention. I'm guessing you, I said to him. Do you think this sounds right? You didn't want the attention, you got to puberty, your voice broke, you hadn't got a voice anymore, there were girls, there was football, there was everything. And he said, well, actually, maybe you're right. But he had lost the ability, apparently, to sing. Certainly the will. So this is, he was talking about being 12, and he was now in his 50s. It's a long time, but that's one of the weirdest stories I've heard.
It is, because he was actually a chorister. So
Actually
that's
a
the bit that
chorister.
doesn't
Yeah.
make sense. Because you'd think you knew that you won the prizes, so that would be there, and you kind of know, oh well, I'm a bit rusty or something. So that's really interesting.
He's managed to convince himself that he can't.
Something like that.
And there's probably more involved.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
But it was lovely, the result of this little research project. Several people said, oh, well, that's okay. I know I can sing a little bit. I'm happy with that. But others went and joined little choirs. One of them joined a similar sort of thing to tuneless choir in the city. And, they've all got something out of it.
From being not
And
singing.
From
which is
not
amazing.
singing. And, of course, the pleasure of it.
The pleasure. This
The
is
pleasure,
what I'm trying to get at, the pleasure of
the
it.
well-being, which is what we're talking about.
Yeah, yes, we're talking about the well-being, and we've almost sort of talked about what we were doing before in many ways, and how the choir was going, and the
It was
people who
going
were
well,
joining.
wasn't it? It
But
was.
so, could you enlighten us, Talibah, as to the sort of difference in your experience
Oh my
in the
God.
last year compared to
Yeah.
what you were talking about, being about the people starting to come and get confident, all these stories they
It
have
was
and
marvellous, because you know, some people, how I describe it is, some people would arrive and they were like little closed flowers, and you'd think, oh my God, they're never coming back, and they would, and then they'd be just open. You could see the faces actually open. The more they came, the people that came a lot were the ones that you care less about singing, and they're proud of being in the choir, and they tell their mates they're in a choir, and you don't have to be able to sing, and they're really proud of it. So there was all that, and it's just this thing you get what I get when I hear all the voices together, and when on Zoom I was lost. It was like it wasn't there anymore, and I could just hear me singing, and it was like, oh. And sometimes it was like, I can't actually sing that song, it's out of my key. And it was because you can sing it when you hear everyone else. So it was really difficult, and I didn't really like it. So we have a little bit on each song. I have it's a PowerPoint presentation that that I share on Zoom, and for the last few bars of each song, that is the words are written in red, and that's the cue to unmute, and we can hear all the latency and all the out of tune thing, and that's just brilliant. I love that bit, but without that bit, I'm just sort of singing, and I have to it just reminded me that there were people there, because you see them singing, but you couldn't hear anything. I didn't really like it, to be honest, but there was a lovely little group of people that they did enjoy it, and they would not have been able to come. Like, some of them don't live in London, but they found it, and it was like a nice thing that they wanted to do, so I kept it going. And the only reason I stopped was when I thought the restrictions were going to be lifted, and then they weren't, and then they said, this is the thing that offended me the most. They said, if you're an amateur choir, you could only have 6 people inside singing, but if you were a professional one, you could have whatever you liked for however long you wanted to sing for, and I just couldn't get the sense of it. It just made me feel outraged. I was so annoyed. As you know.
You came here and you were annoyed,
Yeah,
and
I
then
was
this
really super annoyed. I was like, oh my
prompted
God.
this whole journey into this
Six
discussion. 'Cause
people, and then we did a little live stream where I was on Zoom, but I was here at the tea house, and there were 6 of you singing, including Freddie. And for me, it was like, it was really nice to hear the extra voices, and the people at home, they really appreciated hearing the extra voices, but you couldn't really hear so well.
No,
the
it was
music
very
was
difficult
turned
to
up
hear.
quite
It
loud.
was difficult to hear each other.
'Cause you were
but a
spaced
little
out
bit
as
better
well,
still.
so,
I tried it at home.
Freddie was
when you
like, "No, I'm
first-
not doing that."
I did it a few times. I tried so hard to be there for you, but it was so weird.
It was weird, and I think
You just sat
what
in
I
your
found
room
was
singing on your own.
the more outgoing Tuneless Choir members were the ones that didn't touch the Zoom. They might come once and they were like, "No, I'm not doing that," because they liked the whole thing.
And then you've got other
Yeah.
people in your house kind of wondering what
Yeah, a
on
lot of
earth it
people-
is you're doing.
Yeah, and if you're kind of self-conscious about your voice, the worst thing you want to do is sing in the house where there's other people. Even if they're really nice about it, you just feel really self-conscious. So I lost a lot of people because of that. But it wasn't. I didn't really appreciate the Zoom experience. But I do appreciate that there was something that could be done. Which I think was better than nothing at all.
Yeah, I think there's.
But I think it's also about learning from that experience.
Oh God,
about
yeah.
the importance of a live community.
Live.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That is, I mean, that to me is having it live.
Yeah.
Because when you was talking, I got nostalgic
Oh.
for my misbegotten youth down in Soho.
Misbegotten.
Because the clubs,
Oh,
although they,
Soho. Oh my God.
yeah, because the clubs, although you had all the latest R&B coming over on record, the music, there was a lot
Good news.
of live music,
Yeah.
and it was the live music that would attract people,
That's right.
you know, and being part of that sort of collective community. You know, they're playing my tune,
Yeah.
and it didn't matter if it was, you know, if it would break down or
No,
it was
no.
off key. It was
Seeing
just
someone
live.
play live
And, you know, that's how sort of the Mersey beat, the Beatles and all that. I mean, in this tiny, I mean, the Cavern, it's a dump. It was
But it's not about the building, is it?
It was
It's
just,
the people.
it was people in there
Yeah.
together, listening to, seeing
And
a live
creating.
group.
Yeah.
Even if it was off key, it didn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
It was alive.
And even if you kind of videoed that, it's not the same as
No.
being in there. Because I've heard a lot about the Beatles that seeing them live was something incredible. So even if you see like a film footage of it, it's not the same as if you were in the audience because they had this extra thing that
Well, I was
you had
quite
to
lucky
be
to
there.
see the first Who
No way.
concert where they smashed.
Okay.
Woo! That sounds like my kind of place. No,
Yeah.
no, I'm joking.
And then
But
you
can
see
you
it.
imagine? Oh my God, that must have
If you
been.
see it on the screen,
It's not the same, is it?
nowhere near.
No,
Because
no.
basically, it's, what the hell is going on, man? They're smashing. They're angry, and you know, and they're not hitting the right notes, and they're going crazy with it. Great, I love it. You know.
Yeah, it's an energy you can't capture.
No,
You
so
have to be
you know,
there.
to me, it is that community. It is, you know, I've gone off on one of mine.
No,
little-
but I think it's still you know, in keeping with what we're talking
Yeah,
about. Because
definitely.
if you say you can only have 6 people inside, that's just.
Yeah, I remember before when we would when it was when we were doing it, every
The last
fortnight
one we had
before,
Yeah.
and it was just like once a fortnight, have a sing. You just
Yeah.
feel better, very cathartic.
I'd
You just
come in and
lifted.
Freddie's face would be looking quite tense, and I'd say, "You all right?" And he'd be like, and then by the end of the night, he'd have joined in the singing, and he was like a different person. I'm not even exaggerating.
Really
It's
leads
like-
me to think that there's definitely something in the mental aspect of singing. Like this is where this
I
thing
think
comes
there
from.
really is. I remember my first adult little choir that I sang with when I went to university. I was in university in Wales, so not surprisingly there were quite a few good singers around. But in any case, what I remember vividly was this sense of coming away from a stressful day and just unwinding. And that is, it's an absolutely physical thing. And it's partly the breathing, but it's also, it's the singing together.
It's multi-dimensional.
In fact, the singing together, that's something else that I was involved in once. My generation, whether you remember that, Alfie, there was a radio program which was directed at children, particularly in schools, called Singing Together. And it was designed to get, to help teachers, but also to get children directly involved in singing in class. And you had the odd person like myself, a professional singer, and then you had a presenter who was also a singer, teaching all sorts of traditional English songs. There've been things like that for years. They keep coming round in cycles. They had a movement way back in the 20s, just after the First World War, and there was this great singing, community singing movement. And then somehow that got forgotten, and then we come to the 60s or 70s, and again it all starts again, almost as though it's something new. But how the importance of community singing.
Do you think it's coming back, or what?
Yeah, it'll never go away.
No,
it's
can't,
very
can it?
But it comes back to what we sort of touched upon when we met last week. It was all male, but the voices of the choirs in the valleys of Wales. I mean, there is something, even now, if I hear it, I
It's
would
very
stop.
special, isn't it?
I was just thinking, wow. And can you imagine what life was like in those villages, digging for coal?
Oh God, yes. Yeah.
I mean, now I've been down on the coalface in Leicestershire as part of a course that I was doing. And just going down was enough. But, every day, 6 days a
You've got
week.
to sing, really.
And you would, but those, and it was all based around the chapel. So you had all the chapels as well. I don't know about women singing,
That's interesting. Yeah, that's true.
because, well, they were at home.
At home, yeah.
But I just
It's
wonder,
like work songs, isn't it?
And it's like that group that I mentioned, that folk group, the Watersons.
Yeah.
How they mix their voices, and that harsh Yorkshire sound.
Yeah.
It's a particular sound, isn't it? And it's
There is.
related to the accent as well. Isn't
It is.
It's like a Cockney accent, it's quite flat in some of it. So, because I grew up in Hackney, so that's the sort of. Well, there were lots of different accents. There's about like many different cultures in the bit of Hackney where I lived. But I love the Cockney accent, so I used to be really good at it, but I've lost it now. But it's very
It's
flat.
on the way out now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's all mixed in with other stuff now, so it's not quite the same as it was, but it was a bit more pure when I was growing up. And then a lot of people moved out to Essex, so then it changed again as well. But I even love listening to like old Cockney tunes and stuff, because what I like about it is the sing-alongness, and everyone knows the words. You go to the bar or you're in your front room when they used to have pianos and things, and everyone can join in.
Yeah.
And it's not about how you sound or whether you're in tune, it's literally about...
It was a tremendous relief for people, for those working class communities.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Because lives, I mean, we can romanticize about the lives, and and I think I still do. But the reality was pretty grim. It was, I mean, going to work in a factory. Okay, we say, you would learn a trade and all that. It's all you're doing. You're turning the same screw, time after time, time after time. So there was this boredom factor. There was a boredom factor which would lead to all sorts of domestic violence, drink problems, But the singing, the actual Friday night, Saturday night singing, there's a sense of relief in the drudgery of everyday work.
I mean,
Yeah, I
you'd
mean, you
live
could-
for it, wouldn't you?
And you take that to the football as well. Like we've just watched the blooming Euros, and all they did when they
Oh my God,
when
it
all
was
they
all
did
singing,
when they got
wasn't it?
60,000 people in Wembley, like they opened the doors and everyone
Yeah,
they sung for like an hour before the match and all
Yeah.
the way through it. And like I
What
know
does
they
that
sing a
tell
lot,
you?
but that
Yeah,
was
but that's
something
unusual,
extra,
isn't it?
like
But
bringing people back together again. Like you say, mostly working class people.
Yeah. And
Singing.
the pubs were shut, so yeah.
And-
And so they did nothing but because I was travelling on the under. Oh my God, it just didn't stop.
I used to be a Tottenham Spurs supporter.
Oh dear.
Here
Sorry.
we go. Yeah, here we go. But yeah, 60-odd thousand people.
6.
Health and safety out the window. And when the noise started and the singing, the banter, it was more banter than it was shouting. But it was deafening. Your ears would go pop with this continuous sound. Because he was trapped in this little stadium. And yeah, I mean, that actual sound is something else. But I still go back to the idea that a lot of the songs, and unfortunately I think a lot of the those pub songs have disappeared,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
Or the sort of knees up style.
Yeah.
The sort of
And
pre-Chaz
it was quite sad. I mean, there's one that I always remember, Heart of My Heart, brings back those memories. Do you know it?
It sounds familiar. Maybe if
When
it was
when
the
we
tune.
were kids on the
The
corner of the
words
street,
sound really
we were
super-
rough and ready guys, but oh how we could harmonise,
Yeah,
singing
yeah.
Heart of My Heart, and you get
They're
something you
really
could,
good songs, aren't
yeah,
they?
and it wasn't something, it was shouting, and it was shouted from that invisible soul that's
Yeah,
inside
yeah.
us, and you know, and there was a lot of those songs that was a mixture of passion but sadness as well. That something is dying, something is vanishing, a community is vanishing. But I still love that song anyway. Can't sing it to because of my voice, but never mind.
So we've had a year without that, and like we've seen the expressions of starting, like you know, a few people in the choir, led by the football fans, but what do you think maybe a year without that has maybe done to people? What are the potential effects of not having that in their lives, or what? You know, what effect might that have had?
Well, I had a surprise yesterday. I was rung up by a student I haven't seen for 4 years. She said, "Hi, how are you? Are you free for a face-to-face lesson?" And I thought, gosh, that's all she says. She doesn't say, "Are you teaching?" or
Are you free?
anything. Yeah, are you free? Are you in lockdown? Are you in this world? Any case, she came along and we had a really nice session on a Disney song that she wanted to prepare for a concert tonight. A bit late, but any case, during the course of the conversation, she was saying how she felt it was very strange, how she found it difficult to get back into singing, and she felt that depression and isolation really affected her voice. And I said, yeah, of course it does. I can remember it. I've been very lucky this year. I haven't lost my voice, largely because I've just kept going, doing weekly church services, which was an entirely new experience, but having to sing and play at the same time. But for her, it was quite a shock. And I can remember when I've been tired or ill or something, your voice just goes. It drops, or you just don't really want to do it. And I think that's affected a lot of people. And I think it again is this group thing. Yes, professional singers or even there are lots of amateurs as well love singing by themselves. Get up in front of them. We're talking about singing in pubs. My experience down in this area when I first came 40 years ago, actually longer ago, 50 years ago when I first visited, there was no communal singing in the pub. It was all the local people getting up and doing their favourite song, and it was great. It was wonderful, and it was all so to speak, very natural. But it wasn't communal. It was quite strange. Now, going up to Scotland, I found a very, very different sort of culture where, of a Friday night, they get together, they call it a ceilidh, and everyone just sits down, and it's like a jazz jam session.
It's a good crack, as they say.
Yeah. And it's brilliant. And as a professional musician, seeing a bunch of people, none of whom are professional except one, I think, who is a singer-songwriter, but none of them trained in the conventional sense. All wonderful musicians, all playing together, and all passing the leader, so to speak, round them. Someone would take it up, exactly like a jazz session. And that is not uncommon, apparently, in Scotland.
Oh, yeah.
And you've seen that.
With great pleasure.
Yes.
There's a place, Glenouille, which you need a car to get there.
Yeah.
It used to be a small fishing village, and further up along the hills is a village that was it's deserted. All the men went off to the First World War, but none came back. But this little village, they raised money to buy a community hall, and it is, I've been up there for about 8 years now, absolutely phenomenal, because it is just about music, only music. Music, live music. No records,
No.
Oh, right.
no disco, live music. A few years, a long time now, Charlie, this guy that I'm always on about, he said, come on, we're going up to Glenouille. And we drove up, he had the pipes and the fiddle in the back of the car. And there was all these other pipers and fiddlers there, and it looks right across to the Isle of Skye.
Yeah.
That's
So
interesting.
they started the crack round about 10 o'clock at night. It's still light, by the way. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, it was still going. And
I'm
then
going there.
boats were coming across from the
Probably.
sky to join in. And this whole
Yeah.
so-called crack lasted 2 days.
That's my
solid.
kind of thing. That's
Absolute-
mine.
yeah. But seeing the boats coming across in the sky, with the musicians on the boats, you know, the mind goes into Viking mythology and sort of fishing songs, and the fishing songs up there.
Oh, they're amazing.
I mean, they are these chants, and it's like the beat of the waves hitting the rocks. You know. Silver Darlings, have you heard that one? We seldom look
I don't know
at
about
Silver
the title
Darlings.
from the title, but maybe.
Yeah,
I mean, the
the Silver
Darlings.
Darlings are the herring
Yeah,
fishing.
yeah,
course.
Sung the learning about seafaring. And,
I love live music so much. Like when I think quite a few years ago, maybe 20 years ago, I went to Ireland with my ex, and we did this little tour. We stayed in loads of hostels, and we just went to a different pub every night. And every single one was live music. It was just fantastic.
Where was this?
Ireland. We travelled around from north to south.
Not unsimilar
And it
culture.
was just beautiful. It's just you turn up, you get your Guinness, and people just sing.
And the thing is, you don't have to sing.
No,
You don't have to
you
be a
don't
singer.
have. No,
So
that's
you do
what I
not
like.
have to be a singer.
This is the
I
issue.
think that
Yeah.
is a really important thing.
Yeah,
It's part of
it's
the
just
community.
singing.
Yeah.
It's not like you have to be, you know, like if you've got a gig or something, it's a bit different. Someone's paid you to do their
Yeah.
wedding, fair enough. But it's just singing, you know. So I really, really loved that. That was just amazing. I still think about it now because it was just such a lovely experience. And the hostels were like, oh my God, you know, they were terrible. But we didn't have much money. We went up on a coach and everything. So can you imagine? But it was so we went from Dublin over to Belfast. You know, just took the time because I like both sides of Ireland. But I never forgot it because it's just the sound of the live music and the singing and the voices are just.
And the fact
They're
is,
just
as I say,
incredible. Yeah.
they are not professional.
I think they just take it in, don't
Yeah,
they?
it's
Very
there.
rare.
Yeah. And it's still there.
It's not an issue, you know. Oh, you can't do that. No, you just do it.
But to me, it isn't. It's not even a question of amateur or professional. They just
do
sing.
it, yeah.
Everyone does
It's
it,
just
and
a
it's
thing.
just normal. Yeah.
What's in schools now? Is there a big emphasis on singing?
No.
Don't
I
get
don't
me
think so.
started on that.
No, because I think
Okay, well maybe we'll do that one another time.
Really?
I think it's important to, you know, I mean, that's one thing we do at Oval House all the time. And you know, with Eugene and music, but singing was, I mean, in my school, when I was allowed in, I was,
You was allowed to- oh yeah, you were naughty boys.
I was one of the ones
The
who,
rebel.
I knew it all. And
I know
knew
that
nothing,
one.
yeah.
Sir, that's wrong.
Singing was part of the curriculum.
Yeah. No, I think not. I mean, there's a big fight about it at the moment because there's all this discussion about the core curriculum. And the core curriculum does not include the arts. And yet
that is
it's
definitely a
proved
disaster
time and again that the disciplines of sorry, it's a rather awful word to use, discipline, but the skills involved in music, or painting or drawing or any of the other arts, or acting too, are not only are they life affirming, but they give you something which you can't get in other classes, in other lessons. It's terrible. It really is terrible, and you've got a ridiculous position where it's only in private schools that you have any training offered. That's not universal, but it's very often. And you think, well, where's the next generation of professional musicians, orchestra players, jazz musicians? Where's it going to come from? If people don't have the opportunity at school to. And we have a wonderful situation. I mean, you know, in the old days, Alphie, and the GLC, and before that, they provided there was a music there was a music centre not far away from here, and a whole system of instruments available and teaching available for those who wanted it.
And it was free.
And it was free, exactly.
I was on that committee. Yeah.
I was quite lucky because my daughter went to Pimlico before it went whatever, and she's 20 now, so just not that long ago, and it was really, the music was amazing. But prior to that, when her first primary school, I remember that the head teacher wasn't interested in music, and it was a nightmare. And we were lucky that in her class, one of the mums was a music teacher, and she'd go in once a week. And my daughter's really good at music. Both of my kids are. Because she had another little class. It was called Kaleli or something. And I used to go with my young son when he was a few months old, and he loved it. And well, no, a bit more than that. So maybe he was about 1 or something. And he's very shy, and he got to join in. But if that mum didn't provide that free, and they wanted her to do it all the time for other classes free, she wouldn't have had that. Because she said to me, Maya can really sing, and she was only about like 8 or something. No, less than that. About 6 or something, but she's gifted with music and stuff. And luckily she got into Pimlico as well. But for other people, they don't have that luck, and because it literally wasn't there. It's not valued. It's the first thing to go. They think that, you know, academic stuff all the time, and if you're very creative, musical, artistic, it's like
It's a nightmare.
nightmare's the proper word, but that's probably another discussion.
Which brings into something about a nightmare. That brings in for a lot of young people mental health problems,
Yes.
serious.
Yes.
Because I was over in a big college over in North London, Talibah, and a lot of the young people, and it was all geared towards the arts. That was the interesting
Oh,
thing.
okay.
But it's been cut back. It's been cut back.
Yeah.
It's been cut
I
back.
don't know why they do
So
that.
I point at the laptop. This is taking over. It's almost as if
Oh, right, yeah.
the actual live expression, the actual expressing yourself, is slowly being squeezed out.
It is, yeah.
It's almost as if, that is just a privilege. No, you've got to learn a profession. Sorry, where? These young people, no, they're not going to get a profession.
Well,
But
they
what
don't
we can
want one,
help
they just-
is with their mental health and give them
Yes,
the self-confidence
Yeah.
that might make them
Yeah, that's
to
true.
get a decent job,
Yeah.
rather than just stacking shelves. And I was speaking to a friend the other day. 3 classes have been cut,
This is the norm.
and they're not being replaced.
Yeah.
But the focus is moving slowly away because the arts.
They keep
the
trying
arts,
It's taken quite a long time, but you can take things and use it as an excuse. But I just think, I remember I had this gig. I used to do this like a gig in a pub in Clapham. It was like I think they were like communists or something. It was like a cooperative. It's still going. It was called the Bread and Roses, and I used to do
What's it called again?
the Bread and Roses in Clapham. I'm sure it's still there. Yeah, it's a really nice pub. So anyway, I used to do this little jazz thing on a Sunday, and all the kids would come, and it was like for parents, so they could come with their kids. There's lots of places for the kids to run around, and they could just like sit and have a glass of wine and listen to the music. And I'll never forget one week when I used to have a double bass player and a guitarist, and the kid, like these kind of, they were about like 20 or something, and they were fascinated by the bass player. They'd never seen someone play one, and they were just like,
Isn't
they
it
were
great?
sat there in front of him like, because they weren't used to hearing live music.
And also
I was
it's
quite
so
shocked
interesting,
actually.
The trombone.
Oh my
I
god, that's my
remember-
favourite. Oh,
Yeah, because
Ooh.
one of the things that we used to do at the Oval, because of our contacts, was to take groups of kids down to the Royal Opera backstage.
Oh, you mean the Oval Theatre?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Opera, right? I mean,
Marvellous.
But the introduction for them was to actually go backstage. That to me is where theatre is.
Yeah.
The backstage. You can
All the
smell it.
costumes.
They're all the instruments. They've never, wow. They've only seen them on films, but to see it live.
It's a
They obviously couldn't play them, unfortunately. But just going backstage. Oh, romance.
We've sort of come together to talk about the importance of communal singing and communal music, and like how deep that is in people, and the sort of mental health, potentially the mental health benefits of that, the aspects of it, and what we've maybe lost in the last year. And I think the most instructive thing that I've found so far is the amount of joy and wistfulness in recounting various experiences of live music almost demonstrates that more than a deeper analysis could. Like it's just so obvious that how important this is, and now, like, quickly from the tea house's perspective, we've started doing the jazz nights again, and like they've been full.
fantastic.
Full. Like on a Tuesday last night. Full. It was a Tuesday. Like people are desperate for
Yeah,
live
live
music and to be sharing that experience. But I mean, we've been going about an hour, so we should probably think about wrapping up. But I mean, so does any sort of final thoughts on that sort of in conclusion to what we've been talking about and what we found, what we've lost, and how we get back, or what the problems might be, or anything really.
Well, from my perspective, I think I didn't appreciate it as much as when it was gone. I kind of took it for granted. It was just, I loved it. I loved doing the choir. I loved the people and the sounds and hanging out. But then when it was gone, it was like I didn't realise how much it meant to me, and it was really hard.
I was just
It was
thinking,
hard.
yes, it just occurred to me. It even happened in churches.
That's even worse. My mum couldn't go to church, and she loves singing. She's always singing.
It's like, I mean, the
Can
isolation
you imagine what it's done to people, like
well, I
the
mean,
older
yeah, I mean, you
people?
talk. Sorry, I know
That
I'm
was her
carrying on, but you talk
community.
about
It's very
difficulty
important,
coming back to
yeah.
singing. I think that there's a lot of element of difficulty just even engaging with the society, engaging with other people again after so long, getting back into work patterns again, and yeah, no, I think there's a lot of difficulty, like
I mean, I
you're
wonder
singing.
whether there's possibly a silver cloud to it all. Whether it could be a wake-up call to make more people realise what they were missing. I mean, I don't think we ought to go down the avenue of politics, but we do need to change people's attitude where funding and so on is concerned, because to some extent these things depend on funding. Not the pub singing round on a Friday night, but other things do depend on it, and encouraging young people to sing together, just experience music at all.
I mean, indeed. But
Of
I think
any sort.
If you're gonna just put a toe into the politics of it, it's like you're on a hide into nothing there if they don't realise the damage that's been done in the first place by not allowing people together to sing. Like, you know, that's right deeper. I mean, to encourage more funding for people, for choirs and musical activities and arts activities. Well, if you're coming from a place where you think it's all right to lock people up for a year and a half and not allow them to get together, then you're in real trouble, in my opinion.
I'm wondering, I mean, I've slowly putting my toe or whatever back in the stream of creativity. I've been out of it for a hell of a long time.
Yeah.
One aspect of all this that I've been playing with, because I love the idea of play and improvisation in my brain. And it's pretty bleak, some of the stuff that I'm studying, and it is around depression. And as Freud called it, melancholy, which is slightly different from depression.
Yeah.
It's a serious loss,
Yeah.
and how do you cope with a very serious loss? I mean, depression is something else, particularly manic depression. But how do you cope, or how do you formulate a serious loss? How do you express it? And you can't do it through language, I don't think. You can do it through music. And there's one big institute in London, and that's the Welcome Institute.
Oh,
Have you been there?
Yeah, it's amazing.
I haven't actually,
Oh my
and
God, they
I
put
do
such
mean
good
to,
things.
but
Yeah,
yeah.
it's something that I don't know even where this is going. But listen to how we've been talking. They got masses of amounts of money, and it is solely geared towards mental health, healthy bodies. Brilliant, they've got an amazing museum.
Yeah.
Absolutely terrifying.
Fantastic.
It's
yeah.
like a torture
It
chamber.
is brilliant.
Oh, so you've got 18th century. Ah, you suffering from
It is
well,
amazing.
we'll put you
It's
in
so
chains. It's okay. We'll chain you up and you have a cold
It is
water
quite
bath.
scary though, it's
Yeah,
true.
but it's a beautiful place, and I'm just toying with, to look at. As you say, it has to start somewhere. And there are musicians, top-class musicians that I now know of who have fled. They're gone on the continent.
Are they?
Yeah, before they have to sign, because there's still the common market, there's still money for
Oh, well, the Brexit
Oh,
thing, that's
of
another.
course,
Yeah.
because the
You
money
can't-
was here,
Yeah.
and then it was
It-
like
it-
cut
it-
off
them.
because...
It would be cut.
Oh,
But
that's
places
clever.
like the Welcome, it might be interesting. I've got time to look at it to see how it can start.
Yeah.
How we can look at mental health.
One of If I may add, as well as the welcome, I was asked to look at community music, but I was also asked to look at the work of a man who, funnily enough, in the end came to examine me, he had the wonderful name of Grenville Hancocks. And Grenville came to...
I would change my name to Grenville. Grenville.
Yeah, he came to Morley College. It was really weird. This happened just at the time that I was sort of starting to study this. He came to Morley College to give a lecture called "What About Singing on Prescription?"
Yes.
And it's
On prescription.
yeah, on prescription.
Yeah,
Now,
okay.
by chance, I personally had an experience of this because I had classes of about between 12 and 20 people typically, general singing classes, people who wanted to know a little bit more about singing, not professional, but just for pleasure. And I had three students specifically had been recommended to come and do a singing class, and two of them had their classes paid for out of public funds. One was a fairly obvious one, a person who had some sort of lung problems. So to actually sing was obviously a way of encouraging what could otherwise be boring exercises. And that actually, strangely, that class ended up with a whole bunch of there was a young woman who had cerebral palsy, there was an elderly person who'd had a stroke. And this man, Grenville Hancock, started stroke choirs. He was the person who actually started, and it's now blossomed over the last 3 or 4 years, perhaps a little bit longer. And so there's a centre in Canterbury, and there's another one at Sussex University, where there was one at my university at Winchester, which was particularly to do with music and well-being and health. And while scientific work isn't the be-all and end-all of it at all, but it does mean that some people are saying, look, there is proof that it works. We can show you that it works, which might help people change their attitudes.
Well, I'll have a couple of days on. Now, okay, this gets back to why I say manic depression for me, rather than bipolar.
Yeah. Oh yes, I want to know that.
I'm manic depression. I don't care what anybody says. I'm not bipolar.
No.
Okay.
Although I am bipolar. But medication sort of calms that down. So I'm still up and down. With bipolar, if you what you can do, or what the doctors and the psychiatrists can do, or go back to I forget the name of the Bible, the diagnostic, that big.
Oh yes,
yeah.
the D's.
Yeah.
I started saying it, but I can't remember the actual acronym. Yeah.
Now, I am manic depression. Under bipolar, they would say, right, and they go through the books. We're going to give you this tablet, which will make your mood be like this, but you're going to have to take this tablet in the afternoon, which will offset the effects of that tablet. But then, in the evening, to calm you down, you can take another tablet, which they will do. But when just before sleep, take a sleeping tablet. So, in America anyway, the pharmaceutical industry are making a fortune out of bipolar. And it's fucking people up something terrible. I'm only taking one tablet for my manic depression. Now, if I say, oh, I'm bipolar, I'm sure what would happen, right, so you change your medication, and what you need is, this is a mood state for when you wake up. In the afternoon you'll feel tired, and you're coshed, as I call it. You're under the cost of a pharmaceutical company who's making money out of people's suffering. And I think it's an act of criminality. That's my attitude. That's why I'm very clear about what I am, what I suffer from. Is that I'm on one tablet.
Instead of 10.
Well, I have to take others with what I have blood pressure and all that. But I mean, you know,
had no clue about it.
this is why I keep on referring back to this. It's about language and poetry more than anything. And seasonal. She talks a lot about the seasonal ups and downs. But there's something. I think we're touching on something very important.
Yeah.
But where we go with it is you know, it's.
But there are other ways, and
We can do a choir, like the welcome.
have a choir, have a choir for bipolar people. Do you think?
That would be so interesting.
Not bipolar, no, depression.
No, you can't use that.
We'd have to have how many tablets you take on the door to whether you can come in. Or not.
Yeah, if it's too many, you're going to be allowed. No.
How are you feeling today? Oh, fucking great, I tried to kill myself for a little bit, that was okay. Can I have a slice of cake? Oh, I love that now. Jolly good, start singing. You know.
It's amazing.
But, you know,
Yeah, because
I'm saying not, you know, not just for depression, but
No.
something you can take to a medical institution like you know, the welcome. Could we just do a choir?
I can guarantee that people will feel better.
Yep.
I can actually give that guarantee because I know it from experience. Because I do have quite a few choir members that have been diagnosed with depression, and they've come over a very long period of time, and they've kind of they swear by it. But yeah, when you were saying about the social prescribing, I just wanted to quickly go back to that because one of our members, she's like a GP consultant person. And she's all up for, she's been trying to push this social prescribing thing for ages, and she actually got me in to do a few sessions with a load of GPs so they can feel, well, not in, well I was in once, but then the other one was on Zoom because it was, the pandemic. But so there is this thing in the air about the social prescribing, and she's a good person to get in contact with because she's got a load of contacts, but she's one of the stalwart members of Tunis. She's one of the first people.
Really?
To come. I didn't know she was a GP. She's very quietly spoken, but I knew there's a bit of a twinkle, and she's actually. She's a stand-up comedian as well, so I went to see her. And she's got this. I knew she was going to be like really funny, and she knows who she is, and she's listening to this. She's very quiet, but she's observing everything. She's picking up all the language and everything. But yeah, she's always tried to encourage, because she was trying to get me in to do more stuff to do with social, to let the GPs know that this is a thing that they can do, but I'm not quite sure. She's also doing a PhD. It's similar to the one you did, so she might be a good person.
Oh, fantastic! That was a great first discussion. I think I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's a bit more.
Yeah.
We got it up there somewhere. Yeah.
I learned a new thing: the difference between manic depression and bipolar. I'm not going to forget that. That's like
all about the
I
tablets.
knew nothing about that.
Darien Leader is a guy.
Yeah.
Have you read his stuff? No. Well, Darien Leader, along with her, he's English. He's very pushing this argument about bipolar and drugs. You know, he put it up very, very clearly. I think he wrote another one, Cracks, about how you know, I mean, because they're making money out of it. And it's not just, you know,
And they do
billions upon trillions almost in America.
But there are natural. I mean, I'm not saying that people don't need medication, but there are natural things that you can do as well. So.
Yeah, well,
Like
I know I need
singing.
I
Like
know
singing in a big group
In a big
all the
group,
time
not just
with
sing.
joy in your heart. I'm gonna wrap this up.
I'm
So,
Bringer in the Ten
if
Commandments.
you'd like to hear more from Alfie, you can head back to our YouTube channel, where you've hopefully found this, the Tea House World Service, and his podcast Creativity and Madness with Alan English, exploring all of these types of ideas along, and then many others, and many source materials and all sorts.
Can I just have a little bit to that,
Yeah.
which relates to what we're talking about? Medicine. What's it? Not autism.
Asperger's.
Asperger's.
Yeah.
Don't tell me.
Asperger's. Right?
Yeah.
It's a book. You can't buy the book. You have to sort of get it online. Asperger's children. Under the Nazis, they killed literally 300,000 children with Asperger's.
I've never heard that.
Yeah. Oh, there's a lot that we're exploring. That's why I put the Fury.
That started 3 weeks ago, is that right?
Yeah,
The first discussion on it. So that's number 5, Creativity and Madness, number 5, 6, 7, and the next few I think are just around that sort of topic.
We do women in the Third Reich and mothers of Our Lady. I mean, basically just exterminated children who weren't part of the Reich. You know, basically, if you weren't this perfect child, and parents were giving their children to be cared for, and being cared for meant a tick in the box, and the child was injected. So medicine, mental health, you know. Sorry about that.
We were up high, but see, it's an incredibly important subject, and you've got a lot of discussions on that with Alan.
It's important.
Yeah, it's
and
interesting.
it does prove how people can actually get together outside the system of what is termed in the areas that I want to start moving, the mad doctors, the doctors who deal with our own inner world, our own souls. And you're feeling down, have a tablet. Cheers, doc. Anyway, on that happy note.
And if you want to see more from Talibah, come to Tuner's Choir. Second and fourth Wednesdays of the month. The next one, the first one back is the 28th of July, but after that, second and fourth Wednesday of the month. Information can be found on the Tea House Theatre website.
We might have a little break in August. It always goes a bit weird in August.
Okay, so yes, have a look at the website and just send Talibah an email and she'll let you all know all about it.
Yeah.
And if you'd like to hear more from William, I suggest that in a month or two you go island hopping in Scotland and hopefully you'll come across him desperately trying to get the Gaelic out. Or a better.
By the Pibroch.
But hopefully we might be able to get together again before you depart formally. But
yes, no, almost certainly. Are we sort of closed on that? I was going to say what.
Please, I'm about to. Well, I'm still recording, so just finish up.
Say yes, I probably will be around a little bit longer.
Fantastic. That's lovely. Scotland's losses are gay.
I forgot to tell you about Culloden. Always brings it's the Pibroch.
Oh yeah.
It's a Pibroch.
What's the Pibroch?
It's when you play the pipes.
Yeah.
There's the marching tune that you hear all the time.
Oh,
then it goes into this beat.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
And that is where the poetry comes in. But on dark Culloden, field of gore, they bravely fought, what could they more? And it goes into the Pibroch. Arkinform, Arkinform. And you do that in the Highlands. Everybody with their whiskey glass.
There's something in the eye.
Yeah. I envy you.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful place to finish. Thank you ever so much, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you from the Tea House Theatre. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, folks.
Good afternoon.
afternoon.
Bye.